It's often said that content is king, but in the international TV world, my guest this week is the king of content. He may now be a former brother, but for 37 years, Jeffrey Schlesinger was Mr. Warner Brothers, with 26 of those years overseeing international TV for the studio. So for this King's speech, we talked about Jeffrey's early days in the TV business and the move to Telepictures that ultimately led to him joining Warner's, the negotiation he was most pleased to have lost, and building a world-class distribution team that could speak and sell to all the nations. Enjoy. Hi, Jeffrey. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Danny. It's very good to be here.
Excellent. Well, I always like to start with a fun question. And my question to you, just to kick things off, is if you could be a character either in a Warner Brothers show or a movie, which one would you choose?
Well, that's a good question to start with. So I have a couple of answers, actually. So if we were going to look at comedies, it would have to be Friends, because who wouldn't want to be part of that group? And maybe even the one to end up with Jennifer Aniston. I mean, that wouldn't have been so bad. If I was looking on the drama side, I would probably say The West Wing, because at the time, Martin Sheen exhibited all of the qualities that we wanted to see in a president. And if I could go a little bit further and include HBO programming, I'll say the one where most people talk about me and my personality, and that would have to be Curb Your Enthusiasm, because we all have a little bit of Larry David in us. Some people have a little bit more.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm a big fan of all of those, so I would have loved to have been in all of those too. You're obviously a fan of TV and the shows, but were you a big fan of TV and film when you were growing up in Philadelphia?
Well, I was always a fan of television, and I was always a television watcher. And I remember in the early days when the newspapers, when we would read newspapers, would come out with the fall schedule, there'd always be a double page grid. And for whatever reason, I would pull that out of the paper and I would tack it up on my wall because I was fascinated with the scheduling of what was then the three networks of NBC, ABC, and CBS, and thought, wow, what great choice. Of course, now we think of three networks and think, how could anybody possibly be satisfied with that amount of choice? So I watched a lot of television. And my mother would always say, turn that off. That's not going to do anything for your brain. And little did she or I know that I end up making a career out of it. And one of the things that I still take with me is I remember many, many, many of the theme songs from those great comedies like Gilligan's Island or Green Acres, or even back to Car 54, Where Are You? So I was always a fan of television. I was always a watcher of television, even in my very early days.
And a lot of people come through into the TV business, particularly the distribution side of things, from, say, a business point of view or a legal point of view. Were you also a bit of a commercial guy? Were you a creative guy? How did you start to think about accessing the TV world?
Well, I was definitely not a MBA or a lawyer. In fact, I never took a business course in my life, oddly enough, which is kind of ironic considering I ended up running quite a large, complex business. So I didn't come to it through either of those routes. And on the other hand, I wasn't necessarily a creative person either, although I did end up going to NYU Film School. because I was originally interested in photography and then evolved into becoming interested in film. And people like Martin Scorsese and Brian De Palma were a couple of years ahead of me. Unfortunately, they both knew how to write scripts and dialogue, and I didn't. So I went the documentary film route because you didn't need to write a script. And I was always fascinated with television and film. I was really immersed in filmmaking and kind of thought my path would be to be a documentary filmmaker. And just by random circumstances, having graduated from NYU, my first job out of college was a film editor at CBS 60 Minutes, just because they needed somebody on a moment's notice. And I found myself walking the halls of Edward R. Murrow and Mike Wallace and Walter Cronkite, which was an incredible first job. That led me then to doing more film editing in New York for independent production companies. And then just again by chance, I took a job at Children's Television Workshop as the international production and distribution manager, really just as a job. And there, it was my role to basically bicycle 16 millimeter film of Sesame Street and the Electric Company around to different clients. And the way I found myself going into sales was that I would go to my boss and say, Germany just finished with Sesame Street season 4. What should I do? And he said, well, send them a telex, because that's all we had at the time, a telex, and see if they want to buy season 5. And I said, well, how much should I ask? And he said, more than we got for season 4. So I actually started doing sales, even though I was really just a servicing person, and then ended up in a sales role at Children's Television Workshop for a short period of time. Although I always had a sales and commercial mind. And as I said, I didn't take any business school classes, but my father was a self-made businessman. And I think I learned a lot of my business acumen just from sitting at the kitchen dinner table, listening to him talk about how to make deals and marketing and manufacturing and client relations. So it was just kind of by happenstance.
So Children's Television Workshop and then MCA Universal.
I guess it was about 1979, a million years ago, the old analog dark age. And when I was at Children's Television Workshop, and my job was selling programs to stations in the Caribbean, which was probably worth all of about, $50,000 at the time. And I heard that MCA, which was Universal, but the television group was called MCA TV, were looking to hire a junior sales executive. And I wrote a letter to Ralph Franklin, who was the president at the time, and Colin Davis, who was the vice president, both based in New York, and said I was a young television sales executive. And somehow I got in and got a meeting with Colin and then Ralph, and they hired me. And that was in April of 1979. And I went over to 57th and Park Avenue, where MCA Television was. And I started my career there. And funny enough, the training ground was the Caribbean, because you really could screw it up and it only made a few $100s of difference. But I had the Universal Television Library and was selling to all the Caribbean islands. And the interesting thing about that as a training ground was you had English-speaking countries, you had Spanish-speaking because the Dominican Republic was included, you had French-speaking because Haiti was included, and then you actually even had Bermuda, which had a couple of network affiliates of, I think, ABC and NBC. So you kind of had a real mix of different kinds of sales. And I would arm wrestle with the buyers over whether they would pay $25 an hour or $30 an hour for the Incredible Hulk or Quincy or the Rockford Files. And that's how I started at Universal. Within a year, Ralph Franklin left the company. Colin Davis transferred to Los Angeles, and they were closing the New York office. And he asked me whether I'd been to Toronto before. And I said, no, I hadn't. They said, well, why don't you go up and take a look? Because we'd like to send you there. And they eventually did send me up there in the winter of 1980 to be the syndicated sales executive in Toronto, working for a guy named Peter Hughes, who spent many years at Universal, also eventually moving to Los Angeles. And that's where I started working for a studio and selling all the reruns and films to all the different stations all over Canada, from St. John, Newfoundland to Vancouver, British Columbia.
So in 1983, you joined a relatively small production company called Telepictures. And by 1994, you were named president of international television at Warner Brothers. So that's quite an interesting journey over that period of time. How did that evolve? And specifically, did the international piece really end up being a strong pull for you?
Yes, it was kind of an interesting journey, and actually a rather quick one. In between, I did leave MCA and went to a small company called Astral in Canada. They were in Canada, but small in scale. And Astral represented several companies, including Telepictures, which was only 3 years old, Dick Clark Productions, Rank, EMI, and in my last year there, made a deal to distribute the Fox product in Canada. So I started working with Telepictures and with Michael Solomon. And after about a year, he came up for a sales trip and said, do you plan to spend the rest of your life in Canada? And I said, no, not really. So why don't you come back to New York, and you and a guy named Stuart Graber, who I knew from college, was working at Telepictures, you guys can run the international TV distribution under me. And so in 83, I moved back to New York and joined Telepictures, which was still at that time a small company, although they had just launched People's Court, which continued on until this year in its final season, and a daytime show called Love Connection. And we had a collection of TV movies and miniseries and product from independent producers. And we got on an airplane with a bag full of video cassettes and traveled the world and sold, B-level product to A-level clients. And it was a great way to get into the business. And I loved the traveling. I loved being in all the countries around the world, dealing with different cultures every day. In 1985, Telepictures merged with Lorimar. I remember sitting at the bar at the Majestic Hotel in October when I got the news that we were merging with Lorimar. And now we were entering the big leagues. I mean, Lorimar was the producer of Dallas and Knots Landing and Falcon Crest. They made movies. They had all the TGIF sitcoms of Perfect Strangers and Step by Step and Suddenly Susan and Full House and Family Matters. And very quickly, the Telepictures team took over international distribution from the old Lorimar team. And now we had product people actually wanted. That went on for a few years, and Lorimar was a pretty big independent distributor at the time. And at that time, American product was still pretty popular and in demand around the world. And then in 1989, Warner Brothers bought Lorimar. And again, we became the succeeding team of the two. Charlie McGregor had Warner Brothers for many years. He retired. Michael Solomon, Stuart Graber, and I moved in to take over the distribution of all the Warner Brothers product. I moved to Los Angeles. But to come back to your question, in 1994, I was appointed president of International Television when Michael Solomon, after his 5-year employment contract at Warner, following the merger of Lorimar, left to do his own company. At that time, I was 38 years old, and I was the youngest president at Warner. And when I looked at my counterparts at the other companies, they all were very senior to me. They were the people I looked up to as I was coming up in the ranks as a young sales exec. And that was a pretty radical change and a very steep learning curve. All of a sudden go from being a sales executive to now being the boss. And those are the things that nobody teaches you how to do, and you learn on the job, and where you realize some of these things are more of an art than they are a science, because there is no class and there are no playbooks, and you have to figure it out as you go along. So that was quite a big transition, a huge challenge. I was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. And I served for 26 years as the president of Warner Brothers International Television Distribution.
And over those years, what surprised you about the international TV business?
Well, I think it's safe to say that everything surprised me, because the beauty of the business that we all were in and loved is that first you got to handle product that was appealing and that you emotionally connected to, and that was in the cultural zeitgeist of the country and the world. And the second is you got to deal with lots of smart, enterprising, entrepreneurial people. And in the 80s and 90s, broadcasting and private broadcasting, that's where innovators went, similar to today's tech companies. So you got to deal with all kinds of cultures, all kinds of people. And then every 3 to 5 years, either through regulatory change or technological change, there would be a complete upheaval of the business. There would be new services, new clients, new competition that would challenge you to figure out how they would sequence in and how you could work with them and how you could generate competition and revenue from them. So I remember at every point we'd look at each other and say, could it get more complicated and more challenging than it is now? And the answer was yes, it always did. It went from one-dimensional chess to two-dimensional chess to three-dimensional chess. And you look back now at what you thought was complicated, such as the conversion from public to private television, or from free to pay, or from analog to digital, or from single linear to multi-channel, or from linear only to on-demand. And every one of them became enormously more complex, challenging, and fortunately more financially rewarding, because it just created more competition and more demand for the product that we had to sell. So it was both commercial and very strategic. And that was fascinating, challenging, and invigorating for all of us.
And do you think that the size of the Warner's library, particularly on the movie side, but also to some extent on the TV side, gave you a particularly strong position in the marketplace because you could almost make a new service just with your programming?
There's no question that the scale had enormous benefits. There had already been a lot of consolidation. So the 5 or 6 majors really had the power in the marketplace, especially when it came pay television services, whether it was Canal Plus or Sky or Mnet or what eventually became Foxtel, originally the movie network, and another pay service in Australia. Those services were made or broken by their supply of US slates of feature films. So you definitely had strength. And the other thing is because you had a library, even times when television series became lower in demand, feature films were always a staple of any linear or non-linear, for that matter, service. So you always had an enormous library to sell and resell and resell. And the interesting thing about a library of feature films is, unlike most products, a car, for example, that devalues as soon as you drive it off the lot. And when you sell it the second time, it's less. And the third time, it's less. Film programming might have initial erosion of value from cycle to cycle, but then through competition, the value of that product would all of a sudden increase because it was in demand. And I would always say I was selling a film like Dirty Harry 50 years later for more money, much, much more money than it sold for when it was first released to the television marketplace. So film libraries are enduring assets. And, that's really why you've seen transactions in the current time, such as Amazon buying MGM or Fox being bought by Disney, because of that incredible value, not only of the production capacity, but of the library. Because looking forward, there will still be new and different technologies and rights that will be and sold that we can't even think of today, whether they're exclusive, non-exclusive, co-exclusive, windowed, but that product will always have a marketplace and be in demand.
You've got a lot of power in those positions, but does that come with a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility because the studio has invested so much into these properties?
Well, I would always have two jokes. One would be that we were in the deficit finance recovery business. And the second was there was only one ATM at the studio, and it was outside my office door, and everybody had the passcode, and they always expected it to spit out money. So, sure, success brings more pressure, greater expectations, and an expectation to generate even more revenue in the next year or for the next film. There was never a perspective amongst the production side of the studio that there would be a contraction in the market or that value of product would go down. It would only go up in their minds because production costs only went up. But we're in a funny kind of business where the price that you sell something for really has no relation to the cost of the manufacturing of that product. It has a relationship to the demand, marketability, and exploitation ability, whether in whatever window it's in, to a buyer. So sure, there was always financial pressure. We were always given goals that we thought at the beginning of the year were going to be unachievable. And in most cases, we were able to achieve the goals because there'd always be a deal we didn't expect, a new client who we didn't know would be aggressive, new competition, a new media. And sometimes we had a sense that that was coming. And sometimes it was just kismet that it arrived and created an emotional bidding frenzy in order to acquire a right or a volume deal or an output deal.
So talking about bidding frenzies, let's go back to 1994. And that was a landmark year for Warner Brothers on the TV side, because that was the year that saw the launch of ER, which I think a lot of people were predicting was going to be a very big hit, and another show called Friends, which other people were not so convinced about. And you might be lucky enough to have one of those shows in a slate, maybe even in a career, but to have two on one slate was amazing. When did you first become aware of them? And would you have picked Friends as the one that would have retained that impact all these years and almost generations later?
I remember that year very well, 1994. It was also the year that a show called Chicago Hope was at the screenings. And interestingly, ER and Chicago Hope were both scheduled on Thursday night at 10 p.m. And they were both medical shows. They were very different. Chicago Hope was a traditional medical drama, where ER was groundbreaking in its style, fast-paced editing. So at the screenings, we looked at ER and thought, wow, this is really something. This is a great show, and this should sell very well internationally. And Friends was a comedy that basically had an unknown cast, with the exception of Courtney Cox, who had made a guest appearance on Family Ties and was in the Bruce Springsteen video Dancing in the Dark. And it was a very nice comedy, but nobody really had a perception of what it would go on to be. So we thought ER was the show. And I do remember that with the UK, it was a very important market, and we needed a big sale of ER in the UK. And we thought we'd have a bidding war between the ITV, Channel 4, and BBC. We then found out that BBC immediately bought Chicago Hope, and ITV told us they weren't really interested in ER, leaving only Channel 4. And fortunately, Channel 4 were interested in the show. I remember at the time it was Colin Leventhal and Maury McDonald. They liked ER. They wanted to buy ER. And we sat down after the screening to have a negotiation about the price for ER. And I told them I wanted to sell it for whatever the price was on a life of the series basis at 10% increases per year. And at the same time, they had to renew two shows they had, which were a sitcom called Hanging with Mr. Cooper and a sci-fi show called Babylon 5. And in addition, they had to take Friends. And their answer was, we don't want Friends. We have no interest in Friends at all. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And of course, we were never allowed to package, but we were allowed to sell individual shows simultaneously for the convenience of the customer. And eventually they agreed to include 2 seasons of Friends, along with 2 seasons of ER. And I was very upset because I had hoped to sell both of those shows for life of the series. In the end, looking back, it was the best negotiation I ever lost, because I had no idea, nor did any of us, of the success that both those shows would have, the success in UK that they would have, and the astronomical trajectory of success for Friends, which we were then able to sell at a multiple the next cycle. And then the next cycle split between Sky and Channel 4, and then eventually auction off and go back to Channel 4 exclusively for the final seasons, along with selling reruns and reruns and reruns. So you never know what's going to happen. On the flip side, in France, nobody had an interest in Friends, even in the first season, second season. And I think in the third season, we sold it to Claude Berta at AB Productions because none of the networks would buy it. And we sold it for a very long license period for a flat fee. And essentially, He, as the sub-distributor, became the beneficiary over time of the great value of Friends because we didn't know. And who knew after 10 years it would be such an enduring show? And once again, looking at the amount of revenue that Warner generated from a show like Friends when SVOD came along, and in the US market, first to Netflix and then to HBO Max during this great period of competition, the numbers are staggering. And even today, I'll turn on television and still watch Friends and still find it an enjoyable show 25 plus years later. So I don't think we ever had a perception of what the value of those shows would be back in 1994. And one little anecdote is Warner was known for having big screening parties on the lot. They were very elaborate. And I still have pictures of the cast of Friends and the cast of ER who were at our party to meet the clients wearing name tags saying, my name is Jennifer Aniston, or my name is David Schwimmer, or my name is George Clooney. And today you would think, how could such iconic global stars be wearing name tags to introduce themselves because they were so unknown? But I have the pictures and they're hysterical to look at when you think that these were basically unknown actors who then went on to be global superstars.
There were also some changes in the 1990s that meant that the old FinCin rules changed and networks could get more control over their own programming. And so, in a way, even big studios like Warner Brothers and Sony, Columbia Pictures as were independents because they didn't have the same network affiliation. And yet, over time, the Warner Brothers slate on the TV side probably got stronger and stronger. What was at the heart of the success? Was, in fact, the money that you guys were generating one of the key drivers for them to make bigger and bigger bets?
I think I'd have to give a lot of credit to the success of Warner Brothers Television and our strength in international distribution to my partner of 20 years, Peter Roth, who ran our production side. And Peter used to always say to the networks, I want to be your second favorite supplier. I know your internal studio is first and you'd like to go to them, but I want to be your second. And the way that he became second, or maybe even their first, although they wouldn't want to admit it, was he convinced our senior management that the key to success in television was bringing together the best stable of writer, producer, showrunners, and spending the money to bring them in. People like Chuck Lorre, J.J. Abrams, Don Wells, Greg Berlanti, and the list goes on and on. And Peter was a magnet for talent. He would court them and he would work to bring them in years before their deals expired at other studios. And our pitch to the producers and writers was, we are an independent studio. We will take your show to the best network, get the best deal without any obligation to go anywhere inside first. And that was a very powerful pitch. And therefore, we got the right shows on the right networks, and we grew them with the networks and had the independence from the networks when those renewals came up to be able to extract larger and larger license fees and put that money on the screen into the shows, into the casting, into the production value. So the combination, the alchemy of all of this is great writer producers, resources to make really good shows, Peter would always say, it has to be great. The audience knows. And then the ability to execute flawlessly, which Peter and his team did. And that gave us the gasoline for the engine to go out into the international marketplace. And people knew that not every Warner show was guaranteed to be successful, but they knew that every Warner show would be produced at a very high production value and that we would spare nothing to make that show great. We might fail honorably. And that's what enticed many of the networks or platforms to do these forward-looking output or volume deals with us, because they had the security to know that if we made 10 shows, not all 10 would be hits, but all they needed were one or two to break out, because there'd be outsized returns from those successful shows. And that's the business we're in. You have to be in a portfolio business that enables you to get up to bat enough time to find the show that's going to succeed. And sometimes, to your earlier question about Friends and ER, it isn't the show you think it's going to be, and it's the show you didn't expect it that just catches fire. So we were able to be really strong in the international distribution business with both high volume, because we'd invest a ton of money in pilots and in the deficit financing, with the hope that they would go on to be successful and yield results. And Warner's, as a management organization, bought into that philosophy, which many other studios and certainly independents either couldn't or wouldn't, because the amount of money you had to have at risk at any given time when you're looking at deficits of $2 to $3 million an episode, orders of 22 episodes in a series, 10 to 15 series. When you add up the math, it is an enormous amount of risk capital that needs to be put.
MIP TV is around the corner, and as someone who traveled a lot to meet with clients, and you said earlier that going to markets was something that you really found interesting, and being very hands-on as a deal maker, where did the international markets like MIP and MIPCOM fit into your world? How did the LA screenings compare, and whose idea was it for you to ride an elephant in one of them?
So let's start with the LA screenings. By far the most important gathering and event of the year, because that's where we had everybody on our home turf. We could control the day. We had all our new product. We could bring in our producers. We could bring in our production executives to talk to the clients, to give them an understanding. And we could give all of the visitors from all over the world a real taste of Hollywood. MIP and MIPCOM, I always found, were effective for me personally as the senior executive of the organization, because it allowed me to spend a little bit of time with a lot of clients and get updates. Over the years, deals didn't get done and transacted at MIP or MIPCOM. Maybe you shook hands and finished something you'd been working on for months, or maybe started something that would close in few months' time. So I found it effective, and we always thought it was important to have a big presence there because of who we were and because of the amount of money our clients were spending on us. We thought we should not do it on the cheap and have appropriate hospitality for them and treat them like kings and queens, because they were paying a king's or queen's ransom for the product we were selling them. I would always ask the executive, you really need to go to MIP to see the same people you deal with down the street or around the corner in London or Paris or Munich or Sydney. And I don't know if it was always so essential, but when you do get people together, it creates enthusiasm, it creates a sense of competition, it creates a sense of being bound together with your clients, and you never know what comes out of that. To answer your question about the elephant, Lisa Gregorian, I think, was the best marketing person in the international television business. She started as my assistant in 1996. We worked together for 33 years, and she was always pushing the envelope. And our parties were known to be extravaganzas, and they really were. She said, I want an exotic theme, and we're going to have all kinds of exotic animals. And how about if you ride in on an elephant? In which it took me about a nanosecond to say, okay, I'm in. And, I always said when I leave the business, no one will remember any deals I did. No one will remember anything at all, except the fact that I was the guy who rode into a studio party on an elephant, got off on the stage, and then it got to introduce a big rock band like Chicago or Blondie or the B-52. And you know what? It actually is true. To this day, years and years later, people still say, I remember when you rode that elephant. And it was just an iconic event, but we wanted to have fun. We wanted to do things that were outrageous. And we wanted people to feel a taste of Hollywood when they came to Warner Brothers and spent a day or an evening with us. And I remember that moment as clearly as if it was yesterday.
So you talked about getting the team together at events like screenings of MIP and MIPCOM, and the sales team at Warner Brothers had a lot on their plate. I think they were dealing with pay TV, free TV, transactional deals, feature films, scripted TV series, and I guess also there was probably the kids' TV programming as well, the animated series, Looney Tunes. I mean, it's a very diverse set of programming and tasks. So how did you build that team, and what were the qualities that you looked for to be able to hire people who could deal with such a wide range of tasks and challenges?
I think I'd have to say I feel my greatest achievement in all the years I was with Warner Brothers was assembling a team that I thought was the best in the business and have gone on to either still be doing great things at the company now or to other roles. And it was more of an art than a science, but I was always extremely proud that most of the team I had with me was with me for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. We had very few senior sales executives leave and go to other companies, despite the fact that they had offers to, and probably could have moved up to a bigger job in a different company. And that team was a very unique team. They did have to be multidisciplinarians in terms of genres of product, types of transactions, understanding of technology, understanding of market forces. And we grew together over a number of years. I was not a great leader in 1994 at 38 years old when I took over. When I look back, there were so many things I could have done differently, but fortunately, some of the things I did well were selecting people. And then the most important thing, and unfortunately, this is so missing in our industry and in many industries, is spending a lot of time managing people's careers, not only thinking of what they need to do for you, but understanding it was your obligation to do for them, to keep them challenged, to keep them involved, to make them part of the decision-making process, make them part of the strategy, and then manage their career paths, what meant moving them up within a country, moving them sideways with broader responsibilities, or moving them to a different country with a different set of responsibilities. I'm very proud of people like Josh Berger, who started as an intern with us at, I think, Lorimar before Warner Brothers. Lisa Gregorian, who grew to become chief marketing officer and president of marketing for all of Warner Brothers Television. Robert Blair, who started in Canada and is now president of international television. And on the domestic side, David Decker, who started as a lawyer at Bella Pictures and is now head of all content licensing in the US. So I really felt it was my job and obligation in the last 5 to 10 years of my tenure to build a team that would endure long beyond the time when I was gone. And that I would always say, you need the mix. You need the veterans. You need the primetime players. And then you need the rookies. You need the new blood that comes in and are going to be tomorrow's stars. And fortunately at Warner's, they supported an idea I had for a management development program where we just looked for bright young people, brought them in, and for their first year, moved them around just to learn. That was their whole job, just learn. We don't know where we're going to deploy you, we don't know what your job's going to be. If you make the cut, we will find or make a job for you. So I had the benefit of taking raw talent, and with the team I had, developing that raw talent, teaching them what we developed and figured out, and then deploying them and letting them grow. And I always felt that it was important to push authority and autonomy down as far as you could. People would accuse me of being a micromanager, and I did want to have my hands on everything all the time, but at a certain level and scale, you just can't. And in my later years, if people would ask, how would you describe your job? I would say, I feel like I'm an architect and an editor. An architect in that I would set the structure, the design, the strategy, along with the executives, because I'd want them to be part of it. And then an editor, because I could no longer go out and do every deal in the world as much as I would have wanted to. And so I could be a sounding board and a resource to help the executives recalibrate, evaluate, and think about their deals from a distance and give them the proper direction so they could go with help and execute, and then always be there to drop in when needed, when that drawer that you're trying to twist open needs one more hard twist, or an arm needed to be twisted, to show up, sit down, find the last solutions, build the bridge, and get those deals done. I love that more than anything because it was always about the transactions, but the pride that I have in the team that was assembled and the way they were able to excel and do their job is just unending. I just think that they were absolutely fantastic. And it's really due to their great ability that I was able to stand up and take some of the credit for that to the senior management of the company. But I also made a point of pushing people out in the spotlight and exposing them to our senior management, because I wanted them to know that there were great people who were responsible for the great results.
So in terms of what you're doing now, what can you share about the current world of Jeffrey Schlesinger?
Well, having spent 37 years at Warner Brothers, or some version of Warner Brothers, I thought it was only appropriate when I was going off on my own, because I still feel like I have some gas left in the tank, to have a name like former Brothers Media. because I was a Warner brother and now I'm a former brother. So that is the name of my company. And really, what I'm doing is looking to work with different companies in a strategic way, help them think about the goals and objectives that they want to achieve, help them best monetize their assets, and try to stay relevant and still in a bit of the flow in the business. So at the moment, my three main clients are Canal Plus, Dick Wolf, probably the largest producer of network television, and Archie Comic, who had a deal for many years at Warner Brothers and are responsible for the underlying IP for things like Riverdale and Sabrina. And I'm working with each of them in different ways to help them achieve their goals. And then I've also involved in early stage angel investing for, I'll call them media tech companies. So I've invested in some smaller early stage startup companies and joined the advisory board, several of them. And similar to my comments about putting the staff together, I really enjoy working with young entrepreneurs and trying to bring some perspectives of 40 years of wandering around the globe as a used program salesman and give them some insight and some guidance in terms of what they're doing. And what the future will bring, I don't know, but this has been an incredible ride. I feel unbelievably fortunate to have had 4 decades in the business with amazing people on the buying side and as colleagues that I've worked with. And I hope that I can continue to stay involved and watch and contribute to the growth and evolution of what the entertainment media business has been, will be, because it's always, for me, about putting together the intellectual jigsaw puzzle. Yes, I like to make money, both for myself and for the company. But the thing that really gives you great satisfaction is those aha moments where you take disparate things, put them together, and come up with something that hasn't been done before or a new way of approaching it. And, that's what this business and the company I worked for and the clients I worked with allowed myself and my colleagues to do for so many years. I always would say we start every deal with a blank sheet of paper. We don't get an order form to fill in. Go figure it out. And there's nothing better with coming up with something new. And you know what? If you make a mistake, it's okay. Just keep making new ones because we're going to learn from that and we're going to evolve what we do from that. And maybe some of those things will continue on and you'll go, oh, I had a hand in thinking up that little technique or that little bit of structure, and you get pleasure from that. But it just is incredibly stimulating and rewarding, and I hope that all of those who continue on and follow have some of the same experiences that I was fortunate enough to have the support of management to do innovative and interesting things and challenge themselves to think of new ways to innovate instead of imitate the way business has been done over the last several decades.
Very good. Well, I like to start with a fun question, and I've been in the past having questions to people about things to do with lockdown, but as that's over and we want to put that in the past, I'm taking a new approach. And so I'm offering you the chance, Jeffrey Schlesinger, to have a Jeffrey Schlesinger tile on an SVOD menu. And so if you had that and you were going to populate such an SVOD menu, which 5 TV series or films that you were involved in would you choose for what we're going to be calling Jefflix?
Okay. Well, if we were going to form the 5 top choices of TV series in Jefflix, it would have to be Friends, Big Bang Theory, and Two and a Half Men, 3 of the most watched comedies, I think, in recent history. And on the drama side, ER and The West Wing. And if you could give me a little bit more space to reach out to HBO, because we did distribute HBO product as well, I'd have to add Curb Your Enthusiasm to the comedies, and I'd have to add Game of Thrones to the series. But those would be my top 5 or 7 shows.
Very good. Well, look, that's worth $7.99 a month if ever I've heard it. So that's a pretty strong lineup.
I don't think it can be beat. And if it can be beat, fine. But I think they're shows you can watch over and over because they are storytelling and they endure the test of time. And by the way, you need a laugh.
Well, Jeffrey Schlesinger, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast and for sharing so many amazing memories from such a fascinating career. And I'm sure everyone listening will be looking forward to more stories emerging from the next chapter. But again, thank you so much for being a guest.
Well, Danny, thank you for the opportunity to take a little trip down memory lane. And it's been a lot of fun. And I hope everybody enjoys all the stories. And some of the names have been changed to protect the guilty.